making the most of Microsoft 365 in the modern workplace. My name is John Cole. I'm a solution architect here at Sikich in the IT solutions side of the business. I work really heavily in cloud, server network infrastructure, applications, IT strategy and solutions design from that perspective, and really enjoy conversations around technology implementations and the best way to leverage them for organizations. And Microsoft 365 is obviously a tool set that's available for many organizations, and hopefully we'll learn a little bit more on how to use it a little bit more effectively. So if we go over an agenda real quick, some introductions, Sikich background, I'll give you an overview of modern workplace, and then there's some areas that we're going to address. I've tried to break them down into individual technology areas. Some of them have some bleed over, so we'll discuss that. And so a few items might go back and forth a little bit, but did my best to sort of separate it out to make the most sense of it. Identity access management, endpoint management, productivity, communication, collaboration, business process automation, and business intelligence, security and governance. Copilot is a big one, so we'll touch on that. Some licensing, which is everyone's favorite, I'm sure, but it's important, and I want to give some highlights there. How Sikich can help, and then I want to reserve some time at the end for a question and answer session. So throughout the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to place it in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that. If it's something that's not going to necessarily derail the webinar, I might answer it, but we might save it for the end. There's quite a bit of content that I want to try my best to get through and give the most value and benefit for all the attendees. Goals for the day: a better understanding of the modern workplace, increased awareness of Microsoft 365 offerings, identification of specific solutions to implement as initiatives for your organization, and then also understanding where Sikich might be able to help your organization. I'd like to give a little background on Sikich first for those who may not be familiar with us. Sikich is an organization who has several different arms, as it were: accounting, audit, tax, advisory, technology. We're over 1,500 personnel right now across different geographies and different markets in the U.S. and greater, and really focus on delivering full solutions to our clients, no matter sort of what box they fall into. Pride ourselves on our commitment to excellence and servicing our clients, not just recommending solutions for the cool factor, but also making sure that it solves a legitimate need, and that we can be the experts to help you deliver in those solutions as they're identified. So as we get right into it, the overview of modern workplace. What is the Microsoft Modern Workplace? The Microsoft Modern Workplace is a concept that encompasses utilizing the entire suite of Microsoft 365 technologies, tools, and productivity applications to achieve a more efficient, technologically capable, and highly collaborative work environment for teams in any location. So the term modern workplace sort of gets thrown around, and we might relate it to being as at a point of time. Obviously, we're way more modern as it comes to technology and our implementations of it. So the modern workplace from a Microsoft perspective isn't so much a specific thing, but as I mentioned, an ideology that sort of wraps around potential solutions and tools that are in the Microsoft 365 suite that you can leverage to be more effective. How can you leverage it? Well, to discuss how to leverage it, we're going to jump into the presentation. And so the different categories that I've tried to divide things and segment them into is so you can help best determine how to apply that to that individual need in your organization. So the first section we're going to get into is identity and access management. So at the forefront of any organization, of any technical implementation, a very important piece is understanding who and what, right? What am I providing access to, and who needs access to it? And so there's many ways to do that. Microsoft has renamed a bunch of their tool sets and really brought things under what they refer to as a Microsoft Entra platform. So Microsoft Entra is really that identity and access management platform where different tools and products and features and licenses can be leveraged to implement, govern, restrict, or grant access to resources that might be in M365, or you're filtering access through M365. Some of the major platforms or suites of tools you can use under Microsoft Entra. Microsoft Entra ID, which was just renamed from Azure Active Directory, right? Not to make it any more confusing than it already was, but in reality, the Entra ID moniker does make it a little bit more accurate, as Azure AD really wasn't like your on-premises Active Directory domain services. Some other services: Microsoft Entra ID Governance, Microsoft Entra ID or External ID, which used to be Azure AD External Identities, Microsoft Entra Domain Services, Microsoft Entra Internet Access, and Private Access. And some of these are in preview and they're relatively new, and you'll be able to take advantage of them very soon. And I just want to touch on them to provide a wide picture of what you can leverage. So within the user management, right, with Entra ID, there's different ways to leverage the platform that makes the most sense for your organization. There's in the user management side of things, there's obviously integration with your on-premises Active Directory domain services implementation. So if you have a domain on premises that you have servers and other resources joined to, or if maybe that's not on premises, maybe that's hosted in a public cloud, but like an infrastructure as a service style, you can integrate that to synchronize your users to prevent one origin of identity, right? The users exist in your Active Directory, and then because it's synchronized to M365, you begin to integrate, but you're not creating multiple accounts. It's splitting up your management. Single sign-on is a big part of that, right? Being able to integrate that ID that's been generated in Entra ID to use for all your other applications. And so let me touch a little bit on the slide, and we'll try to wrap it up in a way that makes sense. Entra Domain Services, which is somewhere in the middle, right, between Azure or Active Directory Domain Services and Entra ID. It's actually a platform as a service that runs domain controllers in the cloud, but Microsoft is managing the server-side components of that, and it's really just an interface for you to have an AD domain, right? Unless you need group policies and particular things that Entra ID doesn't provide, that gives you an alternate route to not spin up another domain on premises or otherwise to do that. Entra External ID, this is really a product that allows you to govern access and permissions specifically to customers or guest accounts in your tenant. So if you're familiar with SharePoint and Teams, or even just B2B type integrations with M365, there might be a legitimate need to have users from other M365 tenants, organizations, or even users with Google accounts and things like that that need permissions, or you'd like to have permissions to certain resources within your environment. And External ID is a way to sort of govern those a little bit better for those specific types of accounts. User management, like I mentioned, this is really the area in which you focus on where do I need users to be? How am I going to manage them? What's the most effective way? And the strategy could be different depending on your organization. Cloud-only organizations may choose to, we have no domain, we don't want a platform as a service domain, we just want cloud users only. That's the source of identity. There's ways to do that. There are certain things to keep in mind as we'll talk in security about password policies and enforcement around those particular solutions to ensure that you're not overlooking, I always favor simplicity over complexity, but also when it comes to security, you don't want to overlook some very particular items that might provide you a lot of benefit. Permissions and entitlement management. Entra has some new products, so Entra Permissions Management and Entra ID Governance. So the governance is an add-on product, as we'll talk about in some licensing the security side, to certain premium levels of Entra ID that actually allows you to create entitlements and manage access in more of a policy-driven way across the tenant, right? So you can more seamlessly create profiles and entitlement packages that your users automatically get. So to define them to roles, to make permissions assignment and even replicating or duplicating those permissions a little bit easier. Multi-factor authentication and conditional access is a big part of the Entra ID platform. So as you know, multi-factor authentication from a security standpoint is one of the most basic first items that you need to implement for your users to protect yourselves against some sort of malicious act or cyber threat. Now, how you go about doing that, there's a variety of ways to do that. And when we talk about MFA or multi-factor authentication, I really like to focus. I think it makes more sense to focus on not so much the user, but what are you putting multi-factor on that user is accessing, right? So if you say I put multi-factor on my user, well, where and to what are they accessing? You might have it for this one particular solution, but if you don't have it for another solution, you haven't really put multi-factor on that user in requirement for what they need to access. So leveraging Entra ID via the P1 or P2 licensing, you get access to conditional access. Now, conditional access is a methodology to create policies that can be very granular or very simple in nature to allow you to dictate how users can connect, where they can connect from, and then enforce particular multi-factor or authentication settings. You can go as simple as no one can log in outside of these trusted locations and require multi-factor within those locations. You can restrict access geographically, restrict access to compliant devices. There's a whole sort of things that you can do. A big feature in that is we talked, if you see on the slide here, single sign-on, and the next section under here, application centralization. So with Entra ID, you can actually integrate a lot of your cloud-native SaaS applications or even private applications for that matter into that portal to then pass that single sign-on authentication through that, so that way your conditional access policies can be used. So if you have another, whether it be Salesforce, a VPN solution, some other cloud provider or SaaS application that integrates with Entra ID, when that integration is set up, that conditional access policy can be set up to where, I can enforce multi-factor authentication for these users to all of these solutions that are integrated. And so it allows you better control and flexibility to protect your users more with less administrative overhead. And they don't have to have multiple user accounts and passwords and even multiple authenticator application accounts, right? We all have a bunch of authenticator applications with different accounts within them, and sometimes managing that can be complex. So a consolidation and centralization of those applications and the authentication will give your security team better visibility, and also just your management team, your IT operations management team, less work to do to determine whether I'm spinning up or turning down accounts, or just making the onboarding process more simple with how many user accounts and passwords do my users need. There's a couple new features in preview it's a really identity-centric security service edge offering, and those are Entra Private Access and Entra Internet Access. And in short, those are really a ZTNA, so Zero Trust Network Access, and SWG, a Secure Web Gateway offering. And I'll talk on those a little bit more next. But what's very intriguing about these two features is that we'll talk about private access first, or internet access first, I'm sorry. So this is a security service edge methodology from a security perspective. And it's a secure web gateway. So leveraging your Microsoft 365 tenant, Entra ID, and your conditional access policies, it's a way to not only protect your M365 services, but other internet-based traffic and SaaS applications. So there's, in a sense, how it works is agent-based to your devices, right? There's an agent and some configuration with global conditional access in your M365 portal that would say these endpoints can only access these applications if they meet these conditional access requirements, which could be you're not allowing access to them from non-compliant devices, so non-company owned devices, or you have a special policy for BYOD or mobile devices. So this really becomes more useful as we're moving more into distributed environments as far as employee location, remote workers, wherever that user is. It's giving you an ability to restrict access to your SaaS applications and even other certain internet traffic without that user sitting in a corporate office or sending out a corporate firewall to their home, or it's really just from the workstation, creating an end-to-end visibility and management perspective to being able to control and secure those applications in one platform versus needing several others. So I'm really excited about that one. The next one is private access. So this is similar to internet access, but really focused more on private resources. So let's say you're an organization that has a majority of your applications are cloud, they're SaaS already, but we have some on-premise, whether that mean actually on-premises in a location, or maybe you've built an application, a custom application in Azure, or you're hosting infrastructure services in Azure, AWS, Google, and this application just has to function that way. Well, your remote connectivity options could be something like a secure VPN, it could be Zscaler, it could be a load balancer. Like there could be tons of options for accessing that, but Microsoft is rolling out this secure ZTNA style methodology that sort of eliminates the need for that VPN in most cases. So it's like a VPN because there's an agent base, but you're not having to connect to it. But because it's integrated with ID, it's leveraging conditional access policies and what was kind of formerly available in an application proxy. So basically, this serves as a gateway for your on-premises applications. So instead of needing a VPN or another method, it goes to Microsoft 365 services, and then that proxy will then allow, whether it's an application, whether it's a port or a specific protocol, it will then proxy that and allow you to have more governing access and control, so users can get to things, especially on-premises applications, more effectively, but not at the risk of reducing security. And this also helps in access from anywhere, right? Whether it's at home, a corporate office, traveling, those sorts of things, and it keeps things client or the more providers and programs you go to install in your systems, the more complex things get. So I'm really excited about that feature. And there's another side of this, which really isn't identity access management, but these features I've talked about. So cloud endpoints, such as Windows 365, Azure Virtual Desktop, are sort of taking remote worker or VDI type solutions and replacing them. So leveraging Entra ID and Entra like domain services, all of those virtual cloud PCs can be managed, and you can govern access to them, right? So you can give someone, if you're worried about devices with company data on it, if you spin up an environment, it's essentially a cloud workstation to a degree, however complex it needs to be, that data never really touches that end user's workstation. They're connecting through a client. So it allows you to be device platform agnostic and scalable, and there's different models for fixed or a sort of a prepaid fee or pay as you go based on how many servers you have spun up and things like that. But where this comes into, and why I threw it in the identity and access management side of things, is really the benefit that you get in managing the footprint of where your data is and who has access to it. This also integrates in with conditional access. So really through a client that's device platform agnostic, you can give access to a workstation, a secure workstation that also has your other policies on there. And this is great for BYOD environments, or even users that need a very specific use case. If you're working offshore, if you have international, those types of things, really scalable systems can be built leveraging these solutions. And I think that wraps up that section. There's a lot there, and some of it's going to spill over. And with this slide, I'm going to move into another aspect of the M365 portal, which is endpoint management. So after the identity, the user, we've determined which methodology we need, what makes the most sense for our organization and our user base, and the resources that we have. Now determining what's the best way to manage my endpoints and what options do I have in Microsoft 365. So the endpoint manager platform, Microsoft has undergone some renaming of suites and tools over the last few years, so it does somewhat make it difficult, but these are the names as of right now. The Intune platform can be leveraged in a variety of ways, and there's different licensing levels depending on what you need to do. But the benefit to using Intune is that it's a cloud-based device management platform. So whether you come from a group policy environment where your workstations are joined to a domain, and that's the majority of where your configurations are, like SCCM or some other configuration profile manager, This is an integrated platform in Microsoft 365 that allows you to manage cloud-only devices, on-prem or co-management of devices, and even mobile devices, depending on your enrollment settings and how you choose to provision those workstations. So benefits to Intune, you have everything from configuration profiling from Wi-Fi networks and sleep time settings and USB disabling and those sorts of things to specific security configuration profiles and what are users allowed to do. So really a replacement in a sense of that on-prem group policy from AD management of those devices. And what that gets you is an ability to, regardless of if that device is joined to, if it's managed in Intune, any Intune policy, it can be effective on that device without having line of sight to the domain controller. So the problem before with remote work sometimes, or traveling users is usually are usually the major offenders of that, is when they're in the office, they get all the policies, but someone's on the road 6 months of the year, they don't VPN because they don't need to do it, and then you start having management issues. New policies aren't being enforced on the workstation because they're not VPNing in or in an office where they're communicating with a domain controller, and things become non-compliant and out of sync, and you just have a lack of control. So Intune, because it's cloud-based, will allow you to be able to have more effective control over those devices, regardless of where they are, as long as they have an active internet connection. Devices, some methodologies for that are joining directly to the cloud. So an Entra ID join, or a hybrid, which is the on-prem to where your machines are joined to AD, to an Active Directory domain, but that domain is synchronized to Entra ID, and so those devices can still be accessed, and that would be a hybrid join. And there's still benefits there, but the more and more we go, I'm encouraging organizations to look and state, do we really need these workstations on the local domain? Can we forego that provisioning process and join directly to Entra ID? Because if you're not going to use group policy to manage the workstations, and that's all going to be Intune, you're alleviating the need of a line of sight connection from that workstation to that domain controller periodically to make sure that the appropriate communications and things that are required are happening. So you alleviate that need. And there's a neat part of it in that even with that methodology implemented, if you had to authenticate to an on-prem application, that's a user-based authentication 9 times out of 10. So there's still a methodology to, whether it's VPN or a ZTNA sort of access, as long as there's access, line of sight to a domain controller and that server resource, you can still authenticate those users to on-prem resources without that endpoint, that workstation being joined to the on-premises Active Directory domain. And so just more effective and more streamlined management. Windows Autopilot, Sikich has deployed this a bunch of times, and it works really well for high volume organizations that procure and provision a large amount of workstations and have a very distributed amount of employees across the geographic area. And what it allows you to do is really, depending on what extent you go, is takes those Intune software configuration policies and sort of gives you a jump start. So from the provisioning process, you can pre-provision from a manufacturer, from an OEM manufacturer with some data, and those machines, when they go to your users and turn on, they'll already be set to register in your M365 Intune, your autopilot environment, and depending on what policies are assigned to those devices already. So you can pre-provision everything, and the user gets a machine, and in short, can really get a leg up on that initial out-of-the-box experience and settings that you want. So then it powers on, gets internet connection, and it's already ready to join up. And then your Intune policies start hitting everything that user needs, and sort of onboarding can be as close to zero touch as possible, depending to the length that you go to implement it. Some other neat features in Intune are endpoint analytics. You also get some monitoring features, right? Things about how your workstations are running and applications that they're using that you can make judgment calls based on, maybe for your hardware refresh cycle. These machines are seeing performance intakes. So if you don't have like an RMM or another tool that's already doing that for you, you do get that benefit from the platform. And then Intune can also be used to manage those Windows 365 or Azure Virtual Desktop infrastructure environments, to force your policies there. So that Windows 365 being the dedicated cloud PC use, and Azure Virtual Desktop being more like a shareable VDI instance that you can spin up. And if you have questions on that, we'll try to get to those here at the end. So endpoint management is definitely important. It's another side of the piece of we've managed the users. We've talked about where they are, where am I going to manage my devices, and what's the most effective approach for my organization to do that. And then a big piece of the modern workplace is productivity, communication, and collaboration. And so first it starts with the Office suite, right? We've all used, well, most of us most likely have used the Office suite at some point over time. And it's really evolved to the point where the apps for business and apps for enterprise, it's not just the Office suite, but they natively have a deep integration in M365 services. So whether you're using them or not, there are built-in engineered components into the suite that will automatically leverage pieces of the Microsoft 365, the modern workplace offering natively in the app. So you don't have to go someplace else to get the most out of it. You just have to know they're there and implement them. So it does, because they're subscription based, we all face it, right? Whether that's positive or negative for your organization, they are operational expense versus a capital expense. But there's more ongoing management features that are beneficial, right? There's different channels for updating, so you don't have to worry about GPO and software policy and pushing them out that way. The click-to-run installers can be, they'll auto update when a version's released, and depending on, you can go down to different channels to where they're only updated certain times of year or certain major releases if you so choose, or if your security policy or management policy dictates that. This also allows you to have a consolidation of license management, right? You get to ensure by leveraging the Microsoft 365 licensing for your Office suite that everyone's on the same version. Everyone's on the same version at the same time. No one's behind. There's an easy way to mitigate those rarities, as it were. Exchange Online is another piece, right? Email and M365, just from everything from basic emailing to email archiving, litigation hold, message management, and retention for either keeping messages for a certain length of time or removing them after a certain length of time, depending on what your organization needs. Encrypted email, right? So there's some legacy, what do we call legacy OME, and Microsoft Purview Standard and Advanced. So there's different levels of encryption. And that allows you to take advantage of it without needing another tool, right? There's many tools out there that do it very well. And if you already have a security platform or stack that does it, but depending on your licensing and your entitlements, you might be able to do it natively. And so with the legacy OME depreciating, the new method, Microsoft Purview Standard and Advanced Message Encryption, there's options for encrypting right via inline in your message. So with the standard and advanced, with this methodology in place, you can set your email to be encrypted from Outlook. And if that recipient is already a Microsoft 365 user, when they open the email in Outlook, it's going to verify their identity and decrypt it automatically. So no one-time keys that they have to get that don't work. But if they try to access it from like a mobile phone or a web browser or another computer or a web browser at all, it's going to make them authenticate to get to that message. So you're still secure and it is encrypted, but it does provide a little bit more convenience. And then some standard items like share mailboxes, resource rooms, and even email relay. There's a lot of folks that are retaining Exchange servers online or on premises or other solutions trying to relay email appropriately. But there's many methods in M365 that let you do that seamlessly without needing bolt-on services. SharePoint Online and OneDrive is probably, that is one of the major things that we see as far as digital transformations and benefits to take advantage of. SharePoint Online, instead of an on-premises SharePoint implementation, right? It turns into a software, a SaaS application, right? To where you can focus on the content and what you're trying to use and focus less on the maintenance and the server infrastructure to keep things going. So SharePoint Online sites, we use it a lot of times. You can, anything from an intranet, a collaboration site, or a full-scale replacement of on-premises file services. So a migration from using file shares, which we've seen a shift, and it's a welcome shift of organizations adopting it because there's methodologies to do it that aren't as scary or as impactful to your users as it might seem before. So instead of relying on those on-premises file service for simple file sharing services, leveraging SharePoint allows you to enable some features like collaborative editing. With SharePoint, multiple people can be in files editing at the same time, which is a huge productivity gain. We've all been there where we're trying to review a spreadsheet or a Word document or something of that nature, and someone has it or they have it locked and we can't get into it, and it creates all these issues. And really, you just want to look at it at the same time and see what someone's editing so you can make a joint decision. And SharePoint Online allows you to do that. External sharing and collaboration. So if you're working with external parties, there are secure methodologies to enable external sharing to where you're only sharing what you need to, but it can aid in that relationship, especially if it's organizations where you're collaborating frequently. There's a OneDrive piece to this, and OneDrive can be confusing in itself because Microsoft named, the OneDrive product. There's OneDrive and OneDrive for Business, but you can use a personal Microsoft account, or you can use your work Microsoft account for a personal OneDrive, and it sort of led to some confusion. But in short, the best way to do it, or an option to do it, is leveraging OneDrive for Business to synchronize your SharePoint Online libraries. And what that does is, years ago, it used to download everything. And so people didn't want to do it because it would fill up hard drive space and you had to manage all these things. Now with selective synchronization, it's really only caching or downloading the files that you need as you access them. And then it's maintaining its free space natively so that way you're not filling up your hard drive by synchronizing a library. And if you haven't touched something in a long time, it's probably going to remove that cache downloaded copy because it knows you're not touching it. But something you work on frequently, you can either remain always offline, always available, which would, even if you're offline, there's a copy of it on your machine that when you edit and you plug back into the internet, it's going to check synchronization and sync those changes back up, or just it'll remain in the cloud until you open it to download it. And this has a deep integration with the Office suite. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote all know where to look in the back end for SharePoint Online and Teams resources to be able to leverage those more effectively. So you get distributed access as well. So if you have traveling sales teams and you're VPNing into file services to try to get these proposals, a lot of times that's the first data that organizations will move, right? They determine what's a low risk data, what needs to be available externally. And that's what they move to SharePoint because it's in a highly available cloud environment that it makes it easier for users to access it. But leveraging Entra ID and conditional access with multi-factor, you're still controlling, well, look, it's available externally, but only on this type of device or only from this user with multi-factor in this location. So that way you're still limiting that risk by leveraging those high availability features. The next piece is obviously Teams. I think since 2020 or so, the adoption of Teams has been rapidly increasing in all the new services that Teams can provide. So Microsoft Teams in general, it can be a chatting tool, it can be audio conferencing, file sharing, it can be used for a front end, sort of for SharePoint. So Teams can be somewhat of a confusing piece where you could build teams inside of teams, and if you're sharing files and collaborative type documents, those are actually stored in SharePoint Online, but they're different from a native SharePoint Online site. So it's integrated there, so you can even leverage OneDrive to synchronize that in Teams. But Teams, by organizing them in teams, especially if there's collaboration or communication back and forth within a team on a certain set of documents, it allows you to be very collaborative. And it's also organized. You onboard a person, they're added to the Microsoft 365 teams that they need to be in, and where are my files? You can quickly navigate to the Teams application, click on Teams, and there's all your things. You don't need a SharePoint navigation site or a links site and then constantly maintain that. So it does provide some organizational benefits there. Integrated workflows, anything from approvals and document signatures to it's really the collaborative hub for whether it's in Power Automate, whether it's Power BI, whether it's Excel or SharePoint, there's so many things you can leverage Teams for to achieve a more productive, collaborative environment. Your organization can build out its org chart in Teams to where you can highlight a user and click organization, and those are synchronized attributes from Entra ID, which might be coming from your Active Directory domain. And from there, you can see who's this person's manager, which team are they on, especially in a large organization. It allows, I feel like we use this here at Sikich, and it's given me a lot of visibility into people that I haven't worked with potentially before, whose team are they on. It allows me to build those connections a little bit easier and know more about the organization as I move into working with those teams. The collaborative communication, it's like the different channels and within Teams that you can use for regular communication back and forth. Another big component is Microsoft Teams Phone. So while it doesn't brand itself as a PBX. So there are Microsoft has a different approach. It is, for most organizations, a good option to bring voice services into the M365 environment because you're already using Teams. You're already using so much of Microsoft, and your users, your identities are there. So it allows you to have a voice services that are integrated with an existing application. You can remove your on-premises hardware in most cases, sometimes an SBC or special hardware, but usually it can be required, but only in special cases many times. It's a stable, available solution for your remote workers, right? There's so many people that work remotely, and having Teams as the backbone, if they're in it anyway, you're not having to work with other soft phone applications or another vendor or someone else in that case to make that work. It's a consolidation of management. Again, not another phone system, not another vendor, not another something to manage and govern and restrict. There's also some reporting features within Power BI that they leverage to where you get visibility into your call reports and logs and things like that. And to kind of pile onto that, Microsoft Teams Rooms. So we're using a Teams meeting right now for this webinar. And so there's a lot of features and different licenses and Teams that allow you to leverage more effective conferencing solutions. And these Teams rooms are hardware devices that can be set up in a room that integrate into your conference room or meeting space with Teams. So a lot of units that we use will be set up. You walk in, there's a control electronic device on a conference room table, and you join the meeting. Everything's there, and you can join a meeting without a laptop, without cables. And if you need to, you just join the meeting from your laptop and share from there. So it does sort of make the user experience much less troublesome. So that's a quick sort of overview of some pretty highlighted things that I would recommend in that sort of division of services. Business process automation and intelligence. This is an area that I find has been not as heavily used, especially by either smaller organizations or organizations without the specialty of data analysts or data scientists, those types of things to understand, or don't have a lot of development staff to sort of code and script and modify things to get more access. So Microsoft has several different options. So there's Power Apps and Power Pages, which is really for application development. So if you have developers or people who can develop software and solutions, it gives them sort of a landing spot to do that work for your organization that's native and can be integrated into other things very easily. Power Automate is more about low code or no code solutions. So really automating processes to free up time for your employees, not necessarily to get them to do more, but to make their jobs easier so you can get more done with less stress, less manual work, less touch. So in Power Automate, things are sort of based on either cloud flows or desktop flows. So there's so many cloud flows, basically, that automations that you can run that are cloud-based only. A desktop flow requires either an application or to run on a system. And there's different types of flows, unattended or attended RPA, meaning say you have an HR application or another application that every time there's a series of clicks and there's no other way to script it or automate it. These types of desktop flows can be used to sort of automate that process for you in a sense, to where if there is manual process, you're using that to eliminate it. An attended RPA means someone's sitting there and sort of executing that flow and doing it. And with unattended, you can actually have a dedicated machine or a system to where in the back end, it's just being logged into and it's executing that flow, and it's happening even more in an automated fashion without your touch. And Microsoft does offer some hosted RPA options, which means they'll provide, based on the license, they'll provide a remote cloud environment to run those desktop flows for you, but it does come at a price. And a new feature is process mining, which is an AI feature to where with this license, it will look at your environment and mine or make guesses based on what your users are doing, what they're modifying on things that you can automate, and then you can take those and build automations out of them. Power BI is a platform really for visualizations, transforming data, leveraging cloud workspaces and personal workspaces. So it's more of a data visualization, manipulation type tool, reporting, advanced analytics, those sorts of things. So less about automating tasks and more about getting better visibility to the data. And I think we all know data is our most valuable asset. So looking at it more effectively is definitely going going to benefit your organization more. As we move into the security and governance section that I have here, really this encompasses pieces of all the different solutions. But whether you're talking about the users you have, the resources they need to access, and the tools you're going to use, you need to be able to control and restrict or grant access and know what those policies are to do them. So Microsoft Purview is that platform that they sort of nest these tools under. So auditing, communication compliance, data lifecycle management for documents, so like retention labels, retention policies, data loss prevention, e-discovery for litigation purposes, information protection, insider risk management. These are all things and a control center with logs and also different features and policies that you can put in place to either govern a user or your documents, right? What I find in many organizations is data and documents are kind of scattered about, and no one's really sure where all of it is and what it is and who needs those levels of access to it. So by leveraging the appropriate retention label or data classification policies to manage the data lifecycle appropriately, you begin to define, here's the location we have, here's the data that's there, here's who needs to have access to it, and then logging and reporting on it to make sure that's enforced and that doesn't change. So you might be a manufacturer with highly proprietary information and documents can't be transmitted in a certain way, or you have that same requirement because it's HIPAA or PCI or something of another nature that needs to be sensitive in how it's transmitted or needs to be completely restricted from being transmitted. DLP and those types of rules in combination with retention labels, policies, allow you to have more effective control and establish that, right? It might be proprietary data you just don't want users to remove from SharePoint at all or share it at all or put it on a local device at all because there's a concern that there's highly valuable information and sensitive information in it that you need to protect as an organization. The Defender suite of tools, Defender has been rolled out to incorporate a lot of different tools underneath it. So a main one that we use, Defender for Office 365, which is like an anti-spam, anti-phishing. It scans for safe links and attachments that are integrated with email, Teams, and SharePoint to try to take another step. And so if you get an email with an attachment, it's going to pull that attachment out into a sandbox, scan it, make sure there's no known malware, and then place it back in your mailbox. So that way you can be you can rest assured that there's a higher level of probability that it's not a malicious document. Cloud App Discovery is a feature that really focuses more on like shadow IT. It looks at your users from the perspective of what other cloud applications are they using? What if you're a OneDrive or SharePoint organization, but you have people using Box and Dropbox and all these personally run applications that you're unaware of? So Cloud App Discovery can help you uncover that to either restrict access or establish policies that you can govern that my users aren't going to do this because it's too risky for the organization. Leveraging conditional access, like we mentioned earlier, and in governing so many different parameters on establishing and allowing or restricting access, combined with risky sign-ons. This is a feature that's available with the Enter ID Premium P2 license that really uses AI to a degree to analyze the level of risk for that user sign-in. So you set policies around high-risk users or high-risk sign-ons, and it determines based on a pattern of use, is that risky or not? So you have a user that always logs in from the same location. All of a sudden they're logging in, they're trying to log in from Colombia, or they're trying to log in from a train station at 2 a.m. and it hasn't done that. It may flag that and prevent the login or send an alert to your team to take action on those types of alerts. So there's really a lot of benefit to enabling these features for logs and creating actionable items from data that you might otherwise not be accessing. So there's a lot there in security and governance, and we can go on. We could probably have our own presentation about each individual one of these sections, but really wanted to highlight some of the major areas that you can in as far as a modern workplace offering. The next one, I'm sure everybody has heard about Copilot and generative AI and all the different versions that different providers, whether it's OpenAI or Google or Microsoft, what's being rolled out and what can I do with it. So just recently, I think last week or the week before, Microsoft had removed the requirements. So Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 is available to pretty much anyone, barring there's a couple licensing restrictions for the environment, but there's no more a seat minimum. So they released it to enterprise customers only, and you had to have an enterprise agreement, and you had to buy 300 seats minimum per month to get it. So it was really out of reach for a lot of organizations. But this latest advancement, or this latest release, basically, if you have Microsoft 365, E3, E5, Office 365, E3 or E5, or Microsoft Business Standard or Business Premium, you've met the prerequisite to applying these licenses to your environment. So what it gives you entitlement to is Microsoft's Copilot. So their chat, let's call it Chat GPT version. So it's Copilot is a platform or product that you can chat with and have immersive conversations with to get answers to, but it also enables Copilot and a bunch of Microsoft 365 integrated services: Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, even Microsoft Loop, Microsoft Whiteboard, and OneNote. And so natively within your Office applications, there's individual Copilots, or at least connectors within the Copilot in those applications to build this presentation, summarize this email for me. It's more like an AI assistant to help you be more productive, to help take that administrative burdensome load off of you, to where you can just be more productive. And starting a presentation from scratch doesn't really have to be done anymore. So leveraging it that way is a really wise use case for it. But also Copilot Studio Preview is included. And what Copilot Studio is a platform that allows organizations to develop their own Copilots that are specific and custom there. So using your own data in your own systems in your own way. So it's really more of a development type platform for Microsoft's Copilot AI to allow you to leverage it, not in a pre-built fashion, but more custom for your organization. Microsoft Copilot for Sales is another product. It's another Copilot product. It's not full. It's upcoming. I think it's upcoming in February, I do believe. This product includes Copilot for Microsoft 365. And this is more sales focused, so it's more focused on like CRM, Dynamics 365, but would in Outlook and Word allow you to perform more of a sales related function. So that's how it's trained, and the benefits for it are provided. And some upcoming releases here: Security Copilot, Copilot for Service, and Copilot Enhanced with Viva. So they're just more offerings that Microsoft is putting out there based on their investment in generative AI. Copilot in Windows, I believe it was integrated into Windows 11 in an update this past September. So if you have that update or you get that update, Copilot is actually enabled in the Windows environment, which will be separate from your organization. So the key here with Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 is that it's not a public chat GPT style service, right? It's integrated into your tenant. And while you need to be cautious and conscious of the information that you're entering into it and who has access to that information, because now with an AI tool, if you don't have your governance and your permissions assigned appropriately, people can perform high levels of analysis or mining type operations on anything they have access to. So there's still something to be I don't want to say concerned, but like anything, right? Anything that's productive or has a lot of power, you need to be conscious and careful of how you implement it. But it's also a great productivity tool. So Windows is separate for that, but the product, the Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 is great because it's keeping your data privatized in your tenant. It's not sharing it externally or publicly, or training other large language models with it. So it does allow that. We can talk about licensing really quickly because I do want to get to some questions here. Typical licensing, like we talked about, Microsoft 365 or O365 E5, E3, Business Premium, Basic Standard. Really, the bang for your buck license for most organizations, 300 seats or fewer, is the Business Premium. You're going to get your Office suite. You're going to get SharePoint, Mailbox, Teams. You're going to get Entra ID P1. Premium P1 included, which gives you leverage to conditional access for a lot of things. So that's really a lot of bang for your buck. And the Defender for Office 365 Plan 1 license is included here. For your compliant organizations, may choose these licenses, but require these other add-ons, right? Either E3 EMS or some of these compliance and information governance security can actually be applied to Business Premium to get more features around labeling and retention. And if you're an organization who has compliance recording, and archiving. Some of those features are going to be needed, but it really just depends on your needs. E5 really gives you everything. It's going to give you leverage to all of the security features that are there for the most part that we discussed. Enter ID governance is separate. But there's so many things in licensing that change all the time. And so if you have a question, reach out to us. We'll do our best. We're a CSP direct partner, and we deal with the licensing a lot and all the woes that come along with that. So we're pride ourselves on being experts on the licensing. The Copilot licensing, let's hit briefly. The Copilot for Microsoft 365, which requires these licenses, $30 a month to add onto those users. The other available Copilot for Sales, which requires these licenses and not the others, can be added on to Copilot for M365 for $20 or purchased in full for $50. Now, certain Dynamics 365 Sales Enterprise and Premium license users have some Copilot for Sales functionality that can be enabled, but it's not the full suite of tools. And here are some other licenses. Exchange Online, your Defender licenses, your Teams Phone, where you have your phone access license, your calling plan, for shared and common devices, whether you need domestic and international calling plans. There's a lot of features. There's also, I didn't discuss it, a direct routing integration. So you can work with integrated telco providers if you're a little bit more complex and have distributed or more call center type needs or recording needs. That Teams Phone is still the application you're using, but you sort of have a distributed, highly available telco on the front end of that, providing your numbers and routing and things like that. So there's many options that we can determine based on what's the best fit for your organization, and only go to the level of complexity that's required for what you need. Power Automate, they've had 3 or 4 licensing changes this last year. Some high notes. Power Automate Premium actually now includes your premium cloud flows and desktop flows and attended RPA features. And if you need the unattended RPA features, the process license for that, and there's the hosted and the process mining license, and there's several various Power BI and Dataverse storage add-on licenses, and even separate Intune licenses. And I'm just trying to get through that a little quickly, just so we have enough time for some questions here at the end. How can Sikich help? Many times in organizations, you're not sure where you're at, so the best place to start is an assessment, whether that's scaled down to this specific solution or a product line, or let's do an M365 assessment, or let's do an assessment of an entire organization to see how all the puzzle pieces fit together to determine then, do you need any implementation services or strategic IT planning to happen? Do you need a project roadmap? We can't do all this at once, but we want to accomplish this in 3 to 5 years. Looking at a subject matter expert or a partner like Sikich can really keep your best interests in mind and help you realize either what's achievable or what's not, or maybe a shift in direction to make it more achievable depending on the organization's goals. BCIO advisory services, CSP licensing services. So if you need a licensing partner, Sikich does that. If you need help on a regular strategic resource in your organization to help guide policies and technical advancements, we offer that as well. And so depending on the needs of your organization and where you're looking to go, I'm confident Sikich can help you get there. We have a proven and repeatable process. So there's a discovery and scoping process, which involves solution architects like myself collaborating with the client and understanding of the business and technology landscape, leveraging pre-built project templates that we use from our experience to make projects go more seamless, more successful with as little impact or interruption to the client as possible, providing roadmaps, timelines, and budgets. Detailed proposals and clear communication is key, right? We all want to set the appropriate expectations so that way no one is surprised or no one feels like the deliverable they ended up with wasn't the original intention. Dedicated project team, project manager, and that can work with either no IT team that's internal or IT teams as well. Project meetings, and again, the VCIO, solution architect, project team, project manager are constantly engaged and involved in the engagement to make sure that there's a successful outcome. And with that, I want to open it up for questions here. And I know we're scheduled at 1, but I have some time that I can stay after that if there are those that have some other questions. So I'm going to go to the chat. What's the minimum coverage for the... So with Autopilot, the user, the underlying user that's going to get the device is going to need a license that has the qualifications. So you're going to need licensing, and that license should include Intune. So if you're licensing a user, but you're also licensing via Intune, really most of that work is done in Intune. So if you don't have all of your policies, your configurations, every application, those sorts of things build out in Intune configuration policies or application configuration profiles to install and push down, Autopilot can help you get there, but you're not going to alleviate all of the other manual work if you haven't built that out in Intune. So to get to zero touch with Autopilot, it is a lot of work, and you really have to look at how am I provisioning endpoints, where are they coming from, and sometimes it's completely zero touch, and sometimes there's a balance. But in most cases, you can still alleviate the work, whether it's in the front end of provisioning, whether it's in unboxing, skipping steps, right, to just achieve those minor efficiencies, even at a large volume, ends up being a lot of time, which turns into a lot of savings and more productivity for the team. So I hope that answered that question. And I think the G1, G3, and G5 account question pertains more to the Copilot. And as of right now, based on my last check, it's Copilot for Microsoft 365 is not released to GCC or GCC high environments as of yet. So looking for that to come here I'm not sure. I don't think it's slated on any timeline as far as an official announcement that's going to happen. But hopefully that answered that question. Any other questions? I'll bring up this slide. If you have specific questions around this presentation or anything that I covered or need some more info, my email is listed here. Feel free to reach out to me. If you want to engage the sales team to start an engagement, whether that's an assessment or you have more questions or you just want to talk to someone to see what Sikich can do to help you in any of these areas, the information is here. I'll just leave that up for a while and I'll wait. And if anybody has a question, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer the questions via the chat.